Hello, everyone. My name is Carlo Mahfouz from Lyrica Classic Entertainment. Thank you for watching and joining our interview today with our special guest, organist David Lauer, composer Emmanuel Dubois, and soprano and art director of Lyrica Classic, Yulia Petrachuk. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Great. Today, our conversation will be around organ music and the difficulties to compose for such complex instruments as the organ and perform the contemporary music. Our today's meeting is a part of the music project Organ Apotheosis, and with the support of the Maryland State Art Council, Lyrica Classic introduces new sacred organ and vocal music to the audience in a virtual setting, featuring works by two American contemporary composers, composer Emmanuel Dubois and Elie Tamar. The first part of the project is featuring composer Emmanuel Dubois and his sacred music for organ and voice. The performance will be broadcasted on March 28 at noon on our YouTube channel from the historic Église Saint-Laurent Church located in Florence, Guer in France, and from St. Shara Charbel Church in Jubail, Lebanon. The concert will be performed by soprano Yulia Petrachuk and organist David Lauer, that are our guests today. To attend the event, please register on the website. The link is in the description under the video. Part of our conversation will be in French, so please turn on the English subtitles by clicking on the three dots on the menu under the video and push open transcripts. And please feel free to leave your questions in the chat and we will be happy to answer them. Great. So part of our conversation, we will basically be diving into the background and how it came to be with our composer, Emmanuel Dubois, which I'm going to introduce here a little bit. Hi, Emmanuel.
Hello, Carlo.
So Emmanuel is not our first-time guest, and we've worked with you before, and a great composer with the Requiem of the Fallen. But I'm going to remind our audience a little bit about Emmanuel's story. Emmanuel grew up in Belgium and first received his master's degree in organic chemistry from the University of Brussels and earned an MBA from the University of North Carolina. Only at the age of 46, Maestro entered the University of Michigan, where he studied composition. As a result, within 25 years, he created about 60 works performed at the world's leading venues. In 2019, his oratorio, Requiem for the Fallen, was US premiered by Lyrica Classic at Carnegie Hall in New York. And in 2020, the oratorio was selected by the US Embassy in Moscow for its Mission to Russia annual program, and premiered in Russia by Lyrica Classic in December of 2020 in memory of the fallen in World War II. So most of your compositions are for strings or brass orchestras. When and why did you decide to compose for the organ?
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Carlo. I think I should backtrack a little bit and add more to the story to make it more explanatory, because I believe that we live in a continuum, that the people before us are very important. And I was part of a family that, although they were not true professional musicians, liked music. Mm-hmm. There's one professional musician, and Julia knows about, is my grandmother on my mother's side. She was a fantastic person, very kind and very sweet. And she was singing, in a way, for me, things I understood much later. But there is also the aspect of where I've been educated. And I started being educated in high school, let's say, in a Catholic high school. And because of the exposure to music by Bach and so on, I was interested in becoming part of the choir. At that time, I did not know anything about music. I self-taught piano, unable to read the notes at first. So as Julia said, or you said, at age 46, really, I started delving into music. I was totally ignorant, but the choir director, a very nice priest, just welcomed me among his tenors, and I became a tenor. It just so happened that a very good friend of mine at the time was an excellent pianist and was the organist at the same time. And as you know, in the European church, what we call the jubé in French is where the organ and the choir stands in the back of the church together. configuration of American churches are different. So I was there for all, let's say, services for our high school, Catholic high school, in the chapel, right there with all those other boys. It was a boys' school. And at age 12, when my voice had changed, I became, instead of the alto I used to be before, I became the tenor. Often soprano mutate into bass, and alto mutate into tenor. So I was, I was a tenor. And so I did, and I was exposed to the organ because of my friend, who was an excellent organist and a virtuoso pianist. And so I was there, and when I had time, I would fiddle with that, but kind of thinking of it as a piano in a way, not understanding at all, but the fear of the instrument had vanished. And remember that Mozart called the organ, the pipe organ, the king of instruments. There's some reason, and it's interesting that Mozart, with his genius, never went as far as writing for organ like Bach did. I think it can be a very intimidating instrument to put it that way, to compose for it maybe. So all that, I was not a composer at all at the time, and it just so happened that one day, as we were on a, let's say, on a mission to sing at a wedding mass,
yes,
the whole choir was invited. There were hardly any tenor. And I happened to have to sing the solo parts in Schubert's G Mass, Mass in G. That was quite intimidating, but the choir direct helped me so much, just pronouncing without saying a word, all the words that I pulled through, and that gave me self-confidence. And so those type of events made me, the atmosphere, in a way, fall in love with the organ. And I had some friends who had organs at home, not to go into details, but my life has been much more than piano, strings, and brass. It's really in the background, a love for the organ.
Yeah.
And when I finished my studies at Western Michigan University, I started thinking of writing a piece for organ. And one day, I called my piano teacher. I said, "Listen, Phyllis," she was a very old lady, about my age now. And I said, "Phyllis, I'm writing a piece for organ. Can you recommend me someone to help me?" And she said yes, and she gave me the name of Reverend Dr. Karl Schrock, who was the chair of the Michigan chapter of the American Guild of Organists. I could not have found any better organist in the world, the kindest person I can think of. He's still a very good friend, by the way. And he lives in Michigan. So that's what got me really started. And at the same time, as I was starting to work with him, I went to the library, get all the books I can about organ to understand what the king of instrument really was about. And that became a long work with Karl to follow all my work week by week and to come to the organ suite as we know. But then there was something that happened. As he performed the organ suite, I was kind of, I thought it fell short in a way. And that the second movement could be replaced by something else eventually. And that's when I thought of writing the Ave Maria years later, in 2007, 2008. And at the end, that's what we, Lyrica classical artists and Julia are performing with David on the 28th. The piece as I originally conceived without knowing I was conceiving. And to me, it's really fascinating how all those different strands going back to generation in any way do converge, and we do not know. But we have to have the honesty and the sincerity to follow through the weak signals that we are getting, and to be, it's a way to be faithful.
Yeah.
And so that's the story of the piece. Thank you for listening to me.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And we're going to come back to you in a second, but we'd like to hear a little bit as well from Julia. So hello, Julia.
Hi, Carlo.
You're not only as well our only soprano on the project, but as well leading the project as, president of Lyrica, where you are promoting and focusing on unknown and contemporary music. What difficulties did you face with this kind of virtual project?
First of all, I am not the only soprano on the project. We have several other vocalists that will be performing the second part of the concert. But in the first part on March 28th, indeed, I'll be the only soprano performing Ave Maria by Emmanuel Dubois. And it will be a new experience for me as well, because I have never performed with an organ. So I'm looking forward to it. About the virtual concerts difficulties. First of all, it isn't easy to find good musicians who are willing and able to perform contemporary music, especially in virtual settings. As you know, we are mainly working with new music that was never recorded, and there is no easy point of reference. In this case, learning unknown music takes a lot of time, effort, collaborations with composers, and creativity. By presenting new music to the world for the first time, we perform and set up this music's performing standards. If we talk about works by known classical music composers as Puccini or Rossini, we always refer to the artists who performed the music while the composers were alive, because that tells us how a composer intended it to be performed. And many times we can note that composers gave a lot of flexibility to the performers to, I would say, complete their works with their unique performing styles and instrument specifications. That's why I think that there is no just a music piece and a performer. And to complete a new music work, you need both composer and artist, because they go together.
It is very important, if I may say, very important.
Yes,
they go together.
And basically not every artist can do it. They may perform known classical music works excellent, but have no courage or even talent to create something new. Or if a composer is not available to collaborate, the artist must understand what composer intended and must take charge of the piece and perform it the way you think it's supposed to be. And it's in a way very interesting, but at the same time very challenging.
That definitely kind of speaks to the challenges and kind of the complexity of the music itself and the preparations which goes hand in hand to bring it to the audiences, absolutely. From the composition earlier on, but as well from the training to deliver and, perform it as well.
As well, I would like to add about virtual difficulties. I want to remind our audience that we are doing experiments with our live virtual events. Some parts of our programs, the artists perform simultaneously from the different locations. I can see each other only through the Zoom. Of course, it's a great opportunity that we don't have to travel, and the musicians can be in different cities and even different countries. But absolutely, it adds extra pressure on a performer, especially a soloist. We all know that teleconference technologies are not perfect today, and we still have delays in sound and video. Those delays may not be very noticeable when you talk, but those little gaps are critical for the musicians to create a good ensemble. But we found a system that works for us. As you know, in a live performance, the musicians communicate on stage and over a rehearsals process. create a needed ensemble where the soloist is leading and the accompanist is following the solo line. And an accompanist's job, that can be orchestra as well, is to anticipate the solist's musical expressions and desires. A soloist can take the liberty to hold a note longer or shorter, can make a slower tempo than it was agreed before, or can do different nuances, and even could simply miss some entry. And the accompanist must catch the soloist and follow all the nuances. And it creates that unique experience of live performance because each time it will be different. In the virtual setting, the accompanist cannot hear the soloist. Because of the delays, we must turn the soloist sound off for the accompanist, because the accompanist will listen to the sound which arrives in his speakers slightly delayed. And when the accompanist starts to play, the soloist may be already in a few seconds in front of him. And basically it ruins the ensemble. Because of that, we have to go through the score at the rehearsals and simply talk through and discuss all the details in advance. And then then solist has to follow the accompaniment and communicate visually. The accompanist can only see soloists, like facial expressions and body movements, and try to anticipate his entries and tempos and the way of presentation. As you understand, the accompaniment takes a leading part in the process. In this situation, solist must know his and the accompaniment lines, know how to count, and generally be well educated in solfeggio, even know how to read the orchestra score. So, plus the artist has to express, etc. So I can talk about many other difficulties that we have today with our events, but these are the main aspects of virtual event presentation.
For sure, it's a really difficult job from all ends, and it's interesting as well that we're able to even bring these kind of performances live just in this virtual settings. So definitely a lot of work is being put in, a lot of mastering the voice, mastering the music, and bringing it all together. Bonjour David, merci pour nous joindre. On va prendre un peu de discours ici. Emmanuel et Julia auraient dit, on a commencé avec l'interview en 1 heure. Et s'il vous plaît, veuillez-vous vous présenter à notre public toi-même, où avez étudié, pourquoi et quand as-tu commencé à jouer l'organe?
Bonjour, je m'appelle donc David Loher, je suis issu de l'Est de la France, en Lorraine. J'ai commencé mes études d'orgue au conservatoire de la ville de Metz quand j'avais 15 ans. J'ai commencé très très tard, j'ai eu un parcours un tout petit peu atypique, n'ayant pas de conservatoire là où j'habitais. J'ai dû commencer par jouer de l'accordéon et faire beaucoup d'autres choses avant d'accéder enfin à l'orgue à mes 15 ans. Et donc j'ai passé toutes mes études au conservatoire de Metz, puis au conservatoire de Paris. Et ça s'est terminé par un prix international d'orgue sous la direction, enfin le jury de Marie-Claire Alain. Voilà.
Très bien. Merci David et bienvenue avec nous ce soir. Alors, pouvez-vous parler de votre expérience avec la musique contemporaine, spécialement sur l'organe?
Euh, alors, j'ai eu à plusieurs reprises dans ma courte carrière donc d'organiste à interagir et à travailler sur du répertoire contemporain de compositeurs, je précise, vivants sauf pour un, où j'ai dû interpréter alors qu'il ne l'était plus déjà à l'époque. Mais j'ai eu, oui, plusieurs expériences autour de ça. Et c'est un projet intéressant parce que c'est un peu au départ sans clé, sans code, sans... C'est un langage un peu à part, particulier. Donc, c'est un peu comme une... C'est comme faire des fouilles, on recherche quelque chose, on décortique, on trouve, on cherche, on travaille, on transforme la matière et on lui donne un sens, on essaie de lui donner un sens. Mais j'ai eu la chance de pouvoir faire ça plusieurs fois, oui.
Trouvez-vous plus difficile que la musique classique traditionnelle?
Oh, je ne parlerai pas en termes de difficulté. Je dirais que c'est un autre langage, une autre façon de le faire ressortir. Évidemment, il y a d'autres, ça appelle d'autres ressources techniques. Déjà, l'oreille, elle est un peu... il y a moins de logique que dans la musique dite du répertoire classique ou romantique. Donc, on anticipe moins ce qui pourrait se passer. Il y a un travail plus approfondi aussi sur... Bon, déjà, techniquement, ça doit être très, très en place et bien compris, bien assimilé. Mais il y a ce travail en plus de recherche et de savoir où est-ce qu'on veut conduire telle phrase ou tel thème ou quelle relation. Et puis, le travail du son qui est beaucoup plus poussé dans ce genre d'œuvre, oui.
Alors, pensez-vous que les compositeurs contemporains savent écrire pour l'organe aujourd'hui?
Ou actif pour l'orgue aujourd'hui, je ne sais pas trop. Je connais bien Emmanuel et je sais que lui, il a été actif pour l'orgue. Il y en a, oui, oui, il y en a, mais ils sont souvent organistes eux-mêmes pour la plupart, et donc oui, ils sont actifs pour leur instrument. Mais est-ce que des compositeurs qui ne sont pas organistes au départ soient très actifs? Je sais pas. Il y en a eu quelques-uns. Il y a eu des expériences assez intéressantes entre le mélange de l'orgue et justement de la musique électroacoustique. Il y a eu des expériences de fait avec son et lumière. Je trouvais très intéressant. Après, l'orgue, c'est un peu particulier. Donc, écrire pour cet instrument, il peut presque tout faire. Donc, alors, comment écrire et comment faire que ce soit... C'est compliqué. Je ne sais pas. Non, ma réponse est un peu mitigée là-dessus.
Emmanuel, voulez-vous, would you like to add something to the conversation as well, please?
I will add. I'll say first in English, because what David does is just to go through his past and comparing and see how, from his standpoint, the world of organ music has evolved up to today. But I would like to say that I would say more than 100 years ago, the great French composer Claude Debussy said, freed the whole world and said, write whatever you want, the way you want, as long as it is good. And so he did away with all the rules of classical music in the 1890s.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Merci, David. David,
Merci.
On continue avec vous un peu plus. Alors, en contexte de la musique d'Emmanuel, comment as-tu initié avec la musique et avez-vous déjà joué auparavant? Comment avez-vous rencontré Emmanuel et Julia?
Alors, ça s'est fait de façon, comment dire, c'était totalement par hasard et ça s'est fait sur un tout autre domaine où j'exerce, qui est mon métier actuellement, qui est chef de chœur, donc et chef d'orchestre. Je reçois un coup de fil d'un directeur d'une école de musique du coin qui me dit voilà, on est dans la panade, on avait un chœur, on n'a plus de chœur. Voilà, on fait une création d'un certain compositeur, Emmanuel Dubois, qu'à l'époque, j'avais entendu, vu sur des listings, mais je ne connaissais pas. Donc, je lui ai dit, écoute, et c'est quand le concert? Alors, il me dit, c'est dans 3 semaines. Je lui ai dit, t'es un peu ambitieux, là. J'ai dit, tu te rends pas compte? Donc, je disais à ce directeur d'établissement, écoute, envoie-moi une partition, je regarderai ce que je peux faire. Et donc, j'ai eu la partition, je me suis mis immédiatement au travail. Et donc, j'ai recruté mon chœur et je les ai mis à contribution, à lourde contribution pendant 9 jours de travail intensif, tous les soirs, tous les matins, les samedis, les week-ends, les dimanches. Fait des fichiers son, travaillé tout ça, mis en place. Et après, on a eu une rencontre avec Emmanuel pour une répétition, et c'est là que je l'ai rencontré. Et de fait, le concert s'est fait, et j'ai eu le plaisir d'entendre Julia pour la première fois à la Générale, donc juste 2-3 heures avant le concert. J'ai eu le plaisir de l'entendre, et c'est là que je les ai vus, et que j'ai pris plaisir à travailler cette pièce et à participer à ce projet qui était un superbe projet. C'était très agréable. Moi, j'ai eu beaucoup de retours positifs. On n'a pas forcément vécu les meilleures conditions possibles pour le faire, mais c'était une super expérience et sur le plan musical et sur le plan humain. Et donc, je remercie finalement le, le hasard d'avoir si bien fait les choses et de m'avoir permis de vivre cette rencontre entre ces deux artistes, le compositeur et la soprano. Voilà.
Super, merci beaucoup. Alors qu'on parle sur la sonate pour l'organe, combien de temps a-t-il fallu pour l'apprendre?
Alors ça, c'est encore une autre histoire. Donc au départ, je devais venir la jouer à Kalamazoo l'année dernière, avant le Covid et avant le confinement. Et donc, je m'y suis préparé longuement. Je ne compte pas en termes d'horaire, je compte pas parce que ça ne se quantifie même plus. C'est un travail tellement minutieux, ça prend tellement de temps et on en a déjà peu. C'était des mois de travail et du coup, le concert s'est pas fait, faute de grève, d'avions ratés. Enfin bon, bref, c'était un peu tombé à l'eau. Moi, j'étais assez déçu et désappointé. Je me suis dit, j'ai fait tout ce travail-là et je ne le joue même plus. Et donc là, Emmanuel m'a recontacté et Julia m'ont recontacté pour l'éventualité donc de faire un concert, ce qui est mon premier concert depuis le Covid. En fait, j'en ai pas fait d'autres. On est à l'arrêt total depuis donc une année complète maintenant. Et ce projet donc de le remettre sur pied, ça a été compliqué pour moi de le remettre sur pied en peu de temps parce que très peu de temps justement accordé avec ces histoires de couvre-feu, etc. Les journées sont très denses, donc du coup le soir on peut plus sortir, plus rien. C'est assez complexe. Mais non, ça représente une masse de travail non négligeable parce qu'autrement on peut pas comprendre cette musique comme ça. Ce n'est pas, c'est pas instinctif. Ça devient instinctif avec le temps. Il faut creuser longuement, longuement, longuement et s'y pencher, quoi.
Bien sûr,
Mais
merci.
je peux pas vous dire en termes de, c'est long.
Non, mais bien sûr, merci pour votre travail pour donner cette pièce de l'art tout bien en ces conditions très difficiles. Alors, parlez-nous de l'organe sur lequel vous jouez à l'église Saint-Roland un peu.
Alors, c'est l'orgue de Fleurance, c'est un orgue romantique typique de la région sud-ouest, c'est-à-dire qu'il a toutes les couleurs de l'orgue romantique et toutes les belles sonorités possibles pour rendre une œuvre contemporaine jouable et agréable. La petite difficulté avec, c'est que les notes ne sont pas complètes, il en manque quelques-unes. Alors dans le pédalier, on le ressent pas trop, mais c'est vrai que sur les mains, des fois, il nous manque 2-3 notes. Et puis, c'est un grand orgue, 3 claviers. Et donc, le dernier clavier, celui du récit expressif au-dessus, ils ont la dernière octave du bas qui n'est jamais jouable. C'est toujours un emprunt fait sur les autres. Donc, autre clavier, autre son. Alors, ça, c'est une spécialité donc, du sud-ouest, j'ai l'impression, parce que beaucoup d'orgues sont faits sur le même modèle. Mais après, très agréable, c'est un orgue Magin qui a été restauré il y a pas si longtemps que ça et qui est régulièrement entretenu par le facteur d'orgue Pierre. Ah mince, maintenant j'ai oublié son
Pierre Vial.
nom.
C'est
Pierre Vial, voilà. C'est ça.
Vial.
Qui est entretenu par Pierre Vial, qui fait tout pour que cet orgue joue bien. Ils essaient de donner pas mal de concerts et de le garder à bon flux, bon niveau. En tout cas, c'est l'orgue qui correspond le mieux, je pense, là, pour jouer la sonate.
Génial. Emmanuel, please tell us about your sonata and Ave Maria. When and where these pieces were premiered and who performed them, as well. What is the structure of the piece and what they are about, especially Ave Maria? We'd love to hear.
Yes, gladly so. But I would like first to amplify something that Yulia just said, where she was, in a way, talking about contemporary versus traditional classical music. Actually, as a composer, I try to see a continuum between one. There was a time when, in Vienna, when Beethoven had the Eroica, the third symphony performed, the whole town went crazy. How is that music possible? So, but what Beethoven did at the time is to sharpen the mind of people. And in the continuum of music, and I pay a lot of attention, as I said in my first introduction, it's a continuum of people doing a thing, and we don't know where it's going to lead. The same happens in music, and we do not know where it's going to go. And so that Eroica symphony, which is so conventional for us, was purely revolutionary. And so we have to see that the music today, if it is well written, will be some of the tools that sharpens on an ongoing basis performers to be ready for the future. And so there is a continuum, but yes, anyway, I thought I meant to make that small point. Now, about the organ suite and the organ sonata, I give it two names, I prefer the name organ sonata actually, and the Ave Maria. The first idea for the sonata came, as I said, very early on when I was not even a musician, was more of a dream. And I believe in giving reality to our dreams. That's the fun part of life. We imagine something, and one day we have people going to the moon and walking on the moon. It was a dream forever. That type of thing we do at our small scale. We have to believe in ourselves and work with people. Essentially, it's about humanity. That's what I see performing arts are about. So, as part of my charge, I did not choose it. I came across all those elements because of the way I was raised and born, the Catholic environment, and so on. And I followed through. And so the idea of writing a substantial piece for organ, as we know, in a way in Belgium, you refer to my Belgian origin, we are blessed to have one of the major composers for organ, César Franck, who has composed magnificent chorales and music, and he did all his career in Paris at a church called Église Sainte-Clotilde, and I hope one day to go with David Loher to the Église Sainte-Clotilde, see what it is, where César Franck did all his counts and composed all his music. But coincidentally, he was born in the city of my father. So in a way, I have ownership of César Franck, and in a way, psychologically, it is stimulating. So it led me to write a piece as substantial as that one. And I do not go through the details of what one thing happened, but somehow in the middle of writing that, and very quickly, I meant to go from the bucolic, the pastoral in the first part, to a much more substantive and pronounced and affirmative second part. But then we had the tragedy of September 11, 2001 happening. It was almost a family tragedy because we thought that one of our daughters was in one of the planes for about half a day or so. And so I decided with Carl that what I had written was not good anymore, and I scrapped everything and rewrote something much more forceful, which is the third and the fourth movement, the second part. So we go from the innocent bucolic to the aggressive, and humanity trying to reflect on what is happening to us, what is happening to us. And so that is the organ suite part. But at that time, Carl had asked me, "Don't you write something else?" And I started writing. But I was humbled by what accidentally I had composed. And I thought that the organ suite, the organ sonata as such, was a memorial for September 11. And really, I didn't have the courage and the honesty to say, I'm going to erase that and do something on top. And that is my memorial to September 11. So I've written small pieces for organ afterwards, but I could not do it anymore. Anyway, but as about the Ave Maria, where I went to study music, there was no vocal program. It was a choir, but really no vocal program. So composition was about instrumental music. So that lacked in my education. Obviously, as a composer, you are supposed to be curious. And so fairly early on in the 2002, 3, 4, after I composed the organ suite, I thought of, what can I do? And I'm just ignorant. And as I listened to Carl giving the premiere of the organ suite, the church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, I thought that the second movement could be displaced by something much more profound, and I would add to the context, and that became the Ave Maria, composed, as I said earlier, in 2007 and 2008, which I expanded actually in a bigger Ave Maria for soprano, string, and choir. But that's the story. So I try to follow very strictly the text of the prayer, Ave Maria. And when Carl played that piece, coincidentally, he was doing Lent of 2002, about exactly the same period as now. So everything, although it happens over a period of 19, 20 years, is congruent. And I think we follow, and somehow minds do merge and do converge.
Absolutely.
That's the story. And obviously in 2000, let's add this, Julia, if you allow me, as a piece of history. We met by chance in 2015, because our daughter lives in Washington, and Julia, you had moved to the area. So we met just because we were part of the same music club, okay, in downtown, and we started talking. I was curious about what she was doing as a singer. I was learning, and I started writing a whole series of cycles that she liked. Thank you, Julia, and she performed. But at the same time, I was studying what is the voice about, and eventually it led me to write, to rewrite the Ave Maria, and then to write especially the pieces for l'Oratorio Requiem for the Fallen. So everything is a continuum, and I cannot tell at what time I started writing something. And and I think that's important for people who are not, let's say, composers to understand. And at that time, I thought it was a joke. One of my composition teachers, who specialized in electronic music actually, but he was able to write beautiful fugues, and told to the class, and I was the older student, so it was often a conversation between he and me. But he said, a composer always write the same piece. So, and it seems why talking about Beethoven, talking about Mozart, talking about Bach, they seem to repeat themselves. Sometimes it is intentional. For example, in Bach's last word, the musical offering, I think all the movements had been written before except one. And people said, he copied? He said, no, that was his genius that brought him to do that. So, and I'm talking recently to musicians who perform. I said, does it bother you that this movement here looks that way? No, of course, as long as the music is good and makes sense. That's the whole idea. And the Ave Maria, therefore, is I feel all right to say the Ave Maria, the song for soprano and organ, can entirely replace the second movement, Meditation on Friendship, for organ only. And actually, it is what it is. And Ave Maria is a meditation on friendship. I did not think of the word, but again, if we follow the honesty of what we are doing, everything becomes congruent. And actually, it's a few weeks ago, as I looked at the Ave Maria, and I said, that is really meditation on friendship. I forgot about that. I thought it was a separate song. It was the other one to which I had to amplify the value of the melody. Anyway, so...
Absolutely. And definitely there is always inspiration and like a build up and a continuum, as you said. Julia, we'd like to go back to you a little bit and kind of talk to us about the difficulties in performing Ave Maria in a virtual setting. Can you speak to that a little bit as we're discussing this new world which we live in?
Yes, of course. As Emmanuel said, we had met in 2015. And then I discovered his music, and shortly after I performed his Opus 21st, right, Manu, The Tours of Love, and I really loved it. Later I performed this song cycle many times. After that, I have performed many of his works, including several world and US premieres. Over the years, I learned his style and kind of I know what he wants and how he wants it to be sound. Ave Maria is definitely a difficult, complex, dramatic piece. It's much darker than the traditional Ave Marias that we know. I would say it would better suit a dramatic or full lyric soprano with a good low notes and good high register. It has many tense lines on the high register that will sound a little bit screamy in lyric voice. Still, I think Emmanuel did it intentionally to add a crying effect to the aria, if I understood it correctly, Manu.
Exactly perfect. It's meant to, first, as you know, I like to use the whole spectrum, two actors from C to C, technically speaking. Yes, I think it is, if we can do it, then you have the most beautiful music. And also, I should say, I feel sorry, but remember, my career as a composer started as an instrumentalist. And one soprano told me, Manu, I'm not a clarinet, where the quality of the voice from a low, okay, it goes much lower, to the highs, and it's much higher, change an instrument, a bit the way the organ does. But there is beauty in trying to explore. So in general, instead of staying at high tessitura or something very characteristic of a beautiful soprano voice, I try to ask for more, and I try to broaden the spectrum for the full octaves. And I think the lower register, which is the one of my grandmother, by the way, is so beautiful. It resonates to me very deeply. So thank you for being able to do it. Of course.
Sounds great. Thank you, Julia. And since we're coming close to our end, we'd like to, Emmanuel, what are your future plans? We know that you are starting an opera. Please tell us more about it, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I have plans to work on an operetta. I do not know exactly the character I want to give it to it now. Is it going to be more like opera buffa or a true opera? That's for operetta, opera. I'm not too sure, but the idea would be to talk about important issues of equality and justice, which is obviously a main theme all over Europe, the world, even especially in the United States. And let's talk about the idea of racism and sexism. And it occurred to me that it would be interesting to see how those issues were seen or just perceived in the late 18th century in Mozart's family. And the family looked like a magnificent little lab because there's a kind of assertive father with two children, one an older daughter, Nana, excellently gifted. So history will never know how gifted she was, and a lot has been written about that. And obviously, the young prodigy genius who's Wolfgang, that maybe one of the greatest genius of mankind in that respect. So the idea was to talk about that and how much Nana was repressed by her environment and by her father and by her brother. Although they all loved each other, one doesn't prevent the other. And still, a girl had to struggle a lot more, and still does have. And so the point will be to make us reflect about. That's the idea of the opera. I'm still looking for a librettist because it's very difficult to find someone who could write a libretto, we mean a play, that I will then adapt to the music. And by the way, the opera in a certain way is a dramatic opera, but along that idea that is already written, but I do not like the libretto because I wrote it. So I want to rewrite the opera on a good libretto by someone with a true libretto. So that's the main goal.
Alors, merci pour votre participation. Veuillez vous partager avec nous vos plans et projets futurs et comment peuvent trouver votre performance en plus de notre prochain événement le 28 de mars.
Ben, mes projets futurs, ça va être très compliqué. Je n'en ai, à vrai dire, aucun, vu que je ne peux... Moi, étant donné que mon activité principale est d'être chef de chœur et chef d'orchestre et qu'on a absolument l'interdiction de faire quoi que ce soit avec des adultes, déjà. On peut travailler avec des enfants actuellement, mais les adultes, c'est interdit. Donc, perspective, je n'en ai pas. Peut-être facteur d'orgue, pourquoi pas, peut-être construire des orgues, j'en sais rien, pour trouver autre chose à faire, en attendant que des cieux meilleurs s'annoncent à nous. Écoutez, je ne sais pas, je vais dire que c'est vrai que le projet que vous proposez là, c'est très innovant et c'est motivant parce que ça donne, on a l'impression d'exister un peu quand même, de faire quelque chose. On a l'impression de ne pas être inutile à ce point-là, si vous voulez, mon ressenti profond. Et on en souffre beaucoup, évidemment. Je pense que je ne suis pas le seul à dire ça. Donc, évidemment, merci à vous de me donner l'opportunité de partager une telle expérience. Quoique j'ai jamais accompagné une soprano internationale à si longue distance. Je suis très curieux de voir ça. Donc, si vous voulez, c'est un vrai challenge. En même temps, c'est plein de bonheur parce que oui, ça fait du bien. Et puis oui, on est content de le faire et on a envie de jouer, d'exister, de partager la musique avec le plus grand nombre de personnes parce que un monde sans musique, c'est un monde qui s'arrête, quoi. La guerre commence. S'il n'y a plus de musique, il y a la guerre. Et c'est un philosophe qui disait ça. La guerre commence au moment donné, au moment où la musique s'arrête. Donc, c'est essentiel.
Oui, merci David.
Merci à vous.
Espérons qu'il y aura bientôt des opportunités. Et, oui. Alors, Emmanuel, we're coming to the end, and please, you were kind of giving us a little bit an overview on your future work. Can you go ahead and give us the final kind of couple of words, and then we'll take that to Julia as well.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Merci à tous for this opportunity. There's no question that all what we are gaining here, just look at the frame that we are looking at, what type of horizons we are regrouping around music. And as David just right say, when the music stops, that's when we start having conflicts. There's no question. Art is so important, and I think what I would like is a serious word, but we have to do everything we can to have funding for the art, serious art, and it's difficult to ask politicians to do that. But at stake is the peace of the world. I do not mean to be grandiose, but it is true. And I think the best image I have is when Daniel Barenboim, the famous pianist, just started an orchestra between Jews and Palestinians. And since then, every year they meet and work together side by side. And instead of being enemies, they become friends. And that is the truth.
Merci.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Julia, can you please share with us your future plans and performance? And as we wrap up here, this wonderful conversation.
Yes. Basically, I agree with my colleagues that it's difficult to plan anything for far away because of the pandemic situation, but we hope for the best. As a soprano, I have a few gigs in the upcoming fall. The biggest one is the Elektra's role by Strauss that I'm going to perform at Goethe Theater in Germany and Mozarteum Hall in Salzburg in Austria. And as Lyrica, we will continue our virtual events, activities, introducing new music and artists to our followers. And next season, we hope to be back with our Carnegie Hall concert series, where we present works of a few international composers. To learn more about it, please check our website, lyricaclassic.org. We are also open to collaborations with composers from all over the world. And if someone is interested in working with us, please send us your proposals. The contact form is on our website as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for this really interesting conversation, and thank you for everyone who watched us today. I would like to remind you that our concert of Emmanuel Dubois music, performed by Yulia Petrachuk and David Lauer, will be broadcasted live here on our YouTube channel next Sunday, March 28th at 12 p.m. To attend the concert, you have to register. The link is in the description under the video. Thank you again, and we will see you next Sunday. So I think we're all done here. Thank you so much all for joining and for your time, and we look forward for the concert.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
David. Thank you,
Bye bye, à
Manuel.
bientôt.
Bye bye.
À bientôt.
À bientôt, oui. See you later.
À bientôt.
Bye.